So we're here in the town of Green Cove Springs, Florida today to look at one of the last remaining remnants of the Shuttle program, and one of the only ones I know about that you can actually walk up to that's not in a museum. No velvet ropes, no nothing, it's just sitting here abandoned. This thing's pretty cool, especially if you're a space nerd like me. Let's take a look at it. I'll tell you a little bit about why it's here, and you know, we'll take a look at the dolly too, because you know, this is a mechanical channel and I'm interested in stuff like that. I did a short and I said you can look it up, but people got mad at me and said you should tell the story. Well, I can't do that on a short. So this is private property pretty much around here. You can see there's no trespassing signs and everything, and if you come here, please be respectful to the not just the environment but other people's property, and also be respectful to this last remaining remnant of the Shuttle program. This thing is really cool, and it is here because it hasn't been 100% abandoned, but it's been pretty well abandoned. It was too expensive to transport it further. They got it this far. It was donated to a museum over in Stark, I believe, which is about 33 miles away from where we are now, and it would have had to go there at 5 miles an hour and 36 feet tall, almost 40 feet. So they ran out of money basically, and here it is. So these transporters, the full name is an external tank assembly transporter. They made a bunch of them because each one of these stayed with the tank from the time it left the assembly facility to the time it was lifted into the upright position to go into the full shuttle stack. I don't know how many of them they made. If anybody knows, let me know. But it's one part on this says Unit 10, which leads me to believe they made a bunch of them, and it would make sense that they made a bunch of them because there are always tanks going from the assembly facility to the Cape or in storage, and the original plan was also to have some at Vandenberg Air Force Base when the Shuttle program was initially conceived. So I imagine they contracted for a bunch of these things right out of the gate. I can't find how many. I'm sure somebody could find a contract or something, but I haven't been able to. Anyway, these things are really cool. These weigh a lot in and of themselves. You can see the writing of each weight of each part on here. Just that upper section, that upper arm up there is 505 pounds, 1,200 for the section below it, and then that arc underneath, 9,800 pounds, and so on, all the way on this thing. So these were meant to go on barges, anything that would have been necessary to get them to the Cape or to Vandenberg Air Force Base. And I don't know that they ever shipped any to Vandenberg because they never did any shuttle flights from there. After the Challenger disaster, they kind of gave that up. I imagine they would have barged these around through the Panama Canal probably, rather than transporting them by rail, because these are way too big and wide, I think, for that. But so the basic structure of these is, you can see there's a dolly on each end. Each dolly has 4 wheels. Each wheel steers and has a set of air brakes. There's a giant hydraulic ram that steers each wheel. I don't know if they steer in tandem, or you know, if they both spin the same way, or if they spin opposite ways. You can probably do either one. Each dolly has an operator station with a chair and a control panel. The control panels have been removed, they're gone, so we can't see them. I looked at pictures from when this thing came off the barge from the water, and they are mounted. There's blue boxes mounted in there. So I have reason to believe that they had to be able to control this coming off the barge when it came up from the Cape, where it was in storage for years. Those probably went to the museum and probably got lost when the museum went out of business. I doubt anybody would have known or cared what they were unless somebody went and retrieved them specifically. So unfortunately, the controls are probably long gone, and it doesn't look like any of the dollies have been maintained. There's a tire off the rim down there, and obviously the engines look pretty bad from sitting, and the generator portion probably doesn't work anymore. The hydraulics might, but Interestingly, some of these hoses are relatively new, so I'm not sure what the deal is there. Tested 7/21/10. Okay, they're not as new as I thought. They probably put those on when they were still at the Cape. This was at the Cape until 2013 when the shuttle program ended. But you would have an operator, cat-a-corner on each end that would do the steering, and then you'd have the primary mover hooked to the tow bar down at that end with the air supply for the brakes, so you could release the brakes and pull it. And you know, that would be like a semi-truck or a military vehicle tug of some kind, whatever they had available. But that's the basic structure of the dolly sections themselves. Each end, they refer to each one of these as a dolly, and the whole unit itself is the external tank assembly transporter. And this is called the external tank assembly because it is an assembly. It's a series of tanks. You have the upper tank and the lower tank, and this joint section in the middle where the striations were. And if you look at when they applied the insulation to the tanks, you'll see they don't insulate the center section. They just insulate up to it, and then you can see these striations on the tank sticking out. And they don't really need to, because there's no cryogenic fuel in there other than the domes on each end, the caps for the tanks, and of course the valves and equipment inside there. But they didn't bother to insulate that. I don't think it was necessary. So you'll see they have insulation on the bottom and the top, but not this section. And these are the striations you can see when you look at the other tanks. It's just very interesting. You can just see the structure of this, and the center section is actually riveted. These I guess these are just structural reinforcements. These are riveted, and I'm not sure what these are for, other than maybe strapping, or I don't think they're handholds, but I'd seen those before, and there's one every little bit. As an interesting note, back when they conceived this, somebody somewhere had suggested that, hey, this would make a great base for a space station, or you could put two of these together and spin them to get gravity at the end of each pole. And NASA was like, well, we'll deliver a tank to you if you can do it. No one ever took them up on that. So as far as I know, all of the flight tanks splash down in the ocean, Indian Ocean or the Pacific somewhere. You can see the cap on the front. This one does have the cap. If you want to see what it looks like underneath there, you can look at pictures when they were transporting external tank 94 and they didn't have the cap on. There would have been also a lightning rod attached to that, and it would have carried, that's another thing that would have been strapped to the brackets up there on top that are mounted, and it would have carried any lightning strikes down away from the shuttle, which I'm sure they probably did have some lightning strikes. I don't know how you could avoid that, because this is the highest point of the shuttle here. So this tank was manufactured in 1977. This was made in 1978. Just an interesting side note. So they put up this board here. There it is, the Military Museum of North Florida. That's currently who supervises this. Just a little description about it, what it is, what it was used for. There you can see the other tank at Huntsville. And just a quick description of what it is, and well, they don't really say why it's here. Interesting, they do say that this is located on our museum grounds in Green Cove Springs. Maybe this land has been donated to the museum now, I'm not sure. So this thing is pretty cool. It's not a real, per se, external tank that was ever intended to fly. There was only one remaining flight rated external tank, and that is in California. This is one of the 3 original test tanks. This is number 2. This is the Structural Test Article. It was made so that they could test the integrity of the tanks, pump a bunch of liquids and gases, and test some pressures and things into it. The tank itself is pretty impressive. This weighs something in the neighborhood of 66,000 pounds empty. There's some variation on that. This is not one of the later lightweight tanks or super lightweight tanks. This is made to the original spec, so it is the full weight From what I understand, this is a aluminum copper alloy, and you can see, especially because this one doesn't have the insulation on it, you can see just all the original bolts and everything. It's pretty cool, and of course it's, you know, it is corroded, but not like it would be with steel. And when they put the insulation on, you could see these striations. The insulation would come out a little bit past this, so there's a couple inches of insulation on here. But in this case, you can actually see the striations on this joint plate. This is the upper tank portion, and that's the lower tank portion. There's another dome on each one of these underneath this striated cover. And there's access plates and everything in here, and well, here's one of the access covers, which apparently, look, you can see inside of it, kind of. That's pretty cool. Anyway, there's all kinds of tools and kits they had made to access and service inside of that, in the upright position and from this position. But this tank is here because it was donated to a museum after the shuttle program ended, and they pulled it in from the docks here with donated barges and cranes from the shipping company on the other side of the tank here. And it was staged here until they could take it through town, but I think it had about 33 miles to go to the museum that it was destined for. But they couldn't get the money and everything, or even the permits, I guess, but which requires money, to take down all the light poles and wires and everything over those 33 miles, and they would have had to shut down 2 major highways. This thing is, just the tank itself is something, you know, like 30 feet in diameter. So this is like 35, 36 feet tall, even on the best of days with these tires pumped up. But you cannot go under a single bridge or anything like that. It's never going to happen. So you got to take the long way and take down all your light poles and wires. Well, anyway, that didn't happen, and it's been marooned here in the museum. It was destined for, went under during the pandemic in 2019, so that was never going to happen anyway. If you look at the mount points on the side here that's mounted to the transporter, those are where the solid fuel rocket boosters would attach. And they also use those for the attachment points for the transporter. If you look at the back, which we'll get to, there's one attachment, well, 2 attachment points on the bottom of the tank underneath. I think they were just made as attachment points, because if you look at the top, there's some buckle plates and everything welded on. That would be the frame that would actually bolt to the shuttle that fastens to those. And like I said, this tank, although never intended to be used, is complete in pretty much every way, or was complete at one time. And so all those attachment points and everything were welded on. So the tank in its own right is pretty cool, being a relic of the shuttle program and one of the few remaining ones. But this transporter dolly is a kind of a relic in its own right, and we're a mechanical channel, and it's kind of cool, and I especially wanted to take a look at this. There's a dolly under each end. It's got 8 wheels total, 4 wheels on each dolly, and then this pallet frame underneath, and you can see it's bolted together in the middle. I don't know how many of these they made, but this is probably one of the few remaining intact ones. External Tank 94 that went to California had one of these under it, but they cut it up and disassembled it and put it on its own set of dollies for transport. Basically, they cut the actual dollies off, and they just kept the frame fastened to the tank. So, near as I can tell, this might be one of the last remaining fully intact transporter dollies. If you look up NASA paperwork on this, for whatever the NASA number on this is P78 I think 3140. So it's mostly hydraulics here, and let's just look at the size of these massive tires. So here's me standing next to it. You know, it's they're not small. It has air brakes. Air is supplied from the primary mover. There's a tow bar down there on that end, and so you would hook your air brakes up and release them. So right now the brakes are obviously going to be completely locked, but you can see this hydraulic ram for steering, and each wheel has, each one of the 8 wheels has a steering ram and a brake, which are incredibly rusted, but these hydraulic lines are actually fairly new, so that's interesting. This is currently under the care of a museum down the road. I think it's a military aviation museum. I don't know what they're doing with it. They obviously can't move it to their site very easily, and I don't know if they would if they could because of space, but basically I don't know who's really in charge of maintaining this. But you can see each end of the dolly has one of these. It looks like an Onan generator, but I think the NASA documents aren't completely correct because it's running a hydraulic pump right off of the engine. And then I think it's got a separate 12-volt generator. So if you look at the NASA documents, they're not actually, the initial NASA documents, I don't know if they're the final ones, they're not actually 100% correct. It's run off of propane. You can see the tank's not there. Excuse the wind, I'm sure that's going to make a lot of noise on camera, but nothing we can do, we're outside today. But there is a pretty decent generator here. That's more than 12 volt, I would think. So of course, here's your hydraulic tank, and you can see just the size of this frame because it is made to haul more than the 66,000 pounds of this. I think it's rated for like 78,000 or something. There's notes all over this thing. Unit 10. Each one of these has a part number. Of course, it's got its own lifting points. Let's go down to the other end. And of course, in the middle here we have giant crane lifting points. So I've got a platform here, not sure what that's for. But this is one of the operator stations. As you can see, they've taken the control modules. There's one of these on each end. There would have been a box that sat in here, like a blue box. And these electrical cables, control cables, would have hooked in here. You can see they've got like the mil spec, aviation spec covers on the plugs. Oh, that one's coming off the rim, that wheel. That's not too good. There's the tow bar. Again, same thing on this end. Same Onan generator. I believe it's an Onan, but you can see the attachment point on here. Attaches to the tank. Looks like it's mostly held on by weight, because obviously these bolts aren't tremendously long pulling that on, but it's pretty cool. Got the logbooks in here. Logbooks are long gone. Either somebody stole them or the museum probably took them. But yeah, big brake canisters and big tow bar. Oh, something fell off there. That's probably the muffler. Yeah, that appears to be the muffler that fell off. As you can see, it's not in tremendous shape. This one's missing an air cleaner. That's not good. So, you know, that engine probably not such in good shape. Max speed 5 miles per hour. This was never designed to go far or fast. Like I said, there's one of these operator stations on each end. I don't know. I guess these swing out to kind of guard you and lock into those pins there, you know, to keep you away from the wheels, because these wheels turn. And you know, this one, there's one on the other side. I forgot. We'll take a look at that. And you know, somebody would sit there and they'd steer each end as your primary mover tows it, which would basically be a military or semi truck. You can see that bar in there. I'm not sure what that is for exactly. And obviously it's for moving the tank or adjusting it somehow, but kind of interesting because it's not held to the tank by a lot other than weight. It's primarily held by the pins up there where the rocket boosters would mount. Hose storage. Wonder what kind of hoses. Maybe that's what this rack is for. Interesting. But these, if you look at pictures of these tanks on the dollies, the transporter assembly looks really small from a distance, but it's really not. You get up close, it is a big machine in its own right. That's one of the reasons I wanted to examine it closely here. You can see this obviously was made to be fully tested like a real tank, full tank would. It's got all of the hookup points for gases and liquids. 80 psi plus or minus 5 psi. Interesting. So here's the other operator station. I believe this kind of pulls out. Oh, it still has kind of the seat belt on it, but again, the controls are gone. They've taken the control box with them. Yeah, I don't know. It'd be pretty hard to get this running, I think, if somebody wanted to move this, because I mean, you have to be able to steer it. But the generator on the other end, this one you might be able to get running, but the generator on the other end is probably full of junk and water and all kinds of stuff. You see how big these lifting points are, and they fully suspend the tank here. It's not resting on anything in the front. Appreciate this. You really need to stand back from a distance. So I'm told this is one of these tanks. What is it, 150 feet, something like that? Supposedly, if you laid the Statue of Liberty down, this is actually about taller or the same height as the Statue of Liberty. So they're pretty big. You can see it's got the points for the lines that go up to the tip. It's got everything on it that a flight-ready tank would have had. I don't know why they never turned it into a flight-ready tank. Maybe they thought it'd be more expensive to ship it back to Louisiana and go over it again and refurbish it than it would to just build the next series of tanks. But I think part of the reason is by the time they got done testing this, they had already started the assembly of the actual tanks they were going to use for flight readiness. But this thing is immense, and it's probably not even showing up how immense it is on camera. There's only one of me, so it's hard to show me next to it for scale. I see someone has already graffitied this. It's been sitting here since 2013. Unfortunately, you get vandals. I posted the first short, and I didn't come around and show this side, I don't think, and somebody said, I'm surprised it's not all graffitied up or anything. Well, somebody has disrespected this, apparently. I didn't see that before, but it's unfortunate. This is kind of the last remaining, this is kind of one of the last remaining remnants of the Shuttle era, and it's one of the only ones I know of that you can just drive up and you can touch it, which is fascinating in and of itself. You don't have to go to a museum. This is sitting in the town of Green Cove Springs, Florida, just off the main drag. You can look it up on Google. It's got its own star on the map. So yeah, it's a fascinating piece of space history, and unfortunately I researched way too much about this thing once I learned it was here. And of course, once I learned it was here, I just had to come see it. But all of this, even the transporter in its own right, to me is quite interesting. Now, if you see, I think the bottom was, don't correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the bottom was hydrogen and the top was liquid oxygen or LOX. Of course, you combine that and you get rocket fuel. When it's stored cryogenically, you can get more in. So all of this fuel was used to fuel the space shuttle main engines, and the solid rocket boosters mounted to the side would have given that extra oomph off the pad. So the shuttle would have sat, you can see there's the front mount point right up there, kind of on top of that end of that corrugated strip there. I believe that's the top mount point for the there's kind of a rack assembly that would mount to the top of this and then mount to the shuttle. So the shuttle itself, it would have stuck a little further down than the tank, and then the nose would have been about the end of, roughly the end of this striated point. So the shuttle itself would have been from about these striations down to a little bit past the end of the tank for the engine bells on the shuttle. So this thing, even, I mean, this dwarfs the shuttle by comparison. It's huge. It's how much fuel it takes to get to orbit. But it's really cool to see one of these, especially without insulation. If you go to any of the other two, you see they've added insulation to the one in Huntsville, which is the first test unit that was used for mechanical fitting and making sure everything would fit, and structures and things like that. And they, of course, the ET-94 in California, I think it's on the Shuttle Endeavour now, that always had insulation because it was always flight rated. It is the only one of the three I know of that you can actually see without insulation. You can see the structure underneath, which, again, I'm a space nerd, so it's interesting to me. You see how big this joint section really is, and all the valves and everything, as I understand it, also were in the center, so it's easier to service. So if you had a problem with the tank itself on the pad, you could open that hatch and you could access everything inside that center joint section between the two tanks. So this is really cool, and like I said, it's in Green Cove Springs, Florida. You can look it up on Google Maps. There's a star that marks it. It's really cool, but if you come here, be respectful. This is private property a good bit around here, and they've been very nice in letting people come here and look at it. It is right off the main drag, and again, be respectful to this because it is one of the few remaining. So I would like to see it preserved, but I don't think it's ever going to be, other than just sitting here abandoned. But it is what it is, but we are fortunate in that we can come and look at it and see it up close and firsthand. And especially those of us who watched and followed the shuttle program as it progressed, it is pretty cool. So, as always, feel free to like, subscribe, leave a comment down below, and as always, thanks for watching. So I'm not going to lie here, during my research for this video, my favorite picture that I found in a NASA document, and the specific document, if you're interested, is N91-32630, and it shows this engine testing rig here with a very well-drawn stick figure, and I just thought that was absolutely hilarious to see a stick figure in a NASA document, so there you go.